That has to be kind of really cool, though, to be able to do the exercise and then see an immediate impact in terms of your symptoms, and see that correlation. Because oftentimes I think, you know, maybe people do exercise because they know it's good for them in the long term, but to be able to see a real impact on your symptoms in the moment must be pretty gratifying.
It is, and I tell all these kids, we say kids, but all these folks at CrossFit, you guys get to do CrossFit because you want to. I do CrossFit because I have to.
Yeah.
It's a matter of life or death, and so
Yeah.
my quality of life won't be the same if I stop exercising.
Welcome to Pursuing Health. I'm Dr. Julie Fouché, family physician and former CrossFit Games athlete. Here, I bring you information and inspiration to help bridge the gap between fitness and medicine and support your journey toward your healthiest self. This episode is one of a series of Pursuing Health stories. Here, I feature the inspiring stories of regular, everyday people who've used lifestyle to overcome some incredible health challenges. In this week's episode, I share a conversation with Dr. Jeff Livingston, who is a retired OB/GYN and maternal fetal medicine specialist who was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at the relatively young age of 36. Jeff has a remarkable story of using CrossFit to reduce his Parkinson's symptoms, maintain his functionality, and improve his mental health with a condition that is incredibly isolating. And he's not stopping there. He's organized an annual fundraiser called FOXWOD for Parkinson's research and is advocating for CrossFit to be recognized as a modality helpful for people with Parkinson's. I first met Jeff at a CrossFit Level 1 for physicians a few years ago and enjoyed catching up with him and hearing more about his story in this conversation. Before we dive in, though, I do want to make it clear that this podcast is for general information only and does not provide medical advice. I recommend that you seek assistance from your personal physician for any health conditions or concerns. And with that, let's get started with the episode.
Welcome to Pursuing Health. I'm excited to be here with Dr. Jeff Livingston. And I think we first met at your level 1, when you came out to MDL1 a couple of years ago, if I recall.
Right.
And you've been very involved in CrossFit Health, and you have a lot of experience and expertise as an OB/GYN and a maternal fetal medicine specialist, especially when it comes to exercise and pregnancy, but also have a very personal health story too that I'm excited to learn more about today. So thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share my story.
Well, let's just start with what attracted you to a career in medicine, and then why specifically OB/GYN and maternal fetal medicine, because that is a long road. I can just knowing myself, just finishing a 3-year residency. I can't imagine, 4 more years after that. So
So the reason I went into medicine is I was a biology major, and I figured I could do dentistry, I could do medicine, and so I figured I'd just do medicine. I had good grades, so I went ahead and applied to med school. I didn't know what I wanted to do in med school until I did my OB/GYN rotation. I saw a stat C-section. I said, I got to be able to do that. That was so cool. So I've been a junkie since then.
So you're a bit of an adrenaline junkie. You like to be under the gun and high pressure situations.
Yeah, because maternal fetal medicine, it's like a lot of specialties in medicine. 99% boredom, 1% sheer terror. 1% sheer terror that sometimes keeps you going.
That's what you got to be prepared for. That's amazing. Go ahead.
So I did my undergrad at Franklin Marshall College and University of Richmond, and then I went to Medical College of Virginia, where I did my residency. Then I did my 4-year OB/GYN training in East Carolina. It took 3 years in general practice in a small town in eastern North Carolina. Then I went back and did a fellowship in Memphis. And I was there for quite some time. Then I spent about 20 years in academics, where I just was in private practice here in Panama City about 7 years, and then I just retired last month.
That's amazing. And I've looked you up on PubMed, and you did quite the amount of publishing, and obviously have been involved in academic medicine for a long time. Can you explain to people listening who might not know what maternal fetal medicine is, or what?
Sure. Maternal fetal medicine is otherwise known as perinatology. It's one of the subspecialties of obstetrics and gynecology. It really concentrates on 2 things. One is maternal health. So moms who have diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, HIV positive patients, anybody who's got a major medical problem that falls into, they can complicate their pregnancy either from a maternal or a fetal standpoint, generally MFMs take care of or help take care of. And then there's also the fetal component of it. A lot of prenatal diagnosis and ultrasound is done by maternal fetal medicine. So if your general OB/GYN sees something they're not quite sure what it is, you generally would get referred to a perinatologist or maternal fetal medicine specialist. The 3-year training after OB/GYN.
Awesome. And it sounds like it wasn't too long after you finished your training that you started to develop symptoms yourself and eventually were diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at a very young age. So can you talk about that process of, where you were in life and then how you started to notice that something wasn't quite right?
Yeah, it was my last year of my fellowship, actually, that I noticed it was right.
Okay.
Right. And about that time, I was seen by a neurologist. Was not a movement specialist person, but it was just a neurologist who said I definitely did not have Parkinson's. It was some kind of variant of an essential tremor. And so I took that for a ride for a little while. And then my father noticed that when I was walking down the beach, I wasn't swinging my right arm. That this is something more than just a tremor. So I went to see a movement specialist and was diagnosed with Parkinson's. I was 36 years old. That was 21 years ago.
Wow. Can you just talk about what that initial, kind of what your initial reaction was? I can only imagine, just finishing your medical training, entering the world, finally doing what you really want to do, and then being faced with this really sort of scary diagnosis.
It was devastating. And to tell you the truth, I was not good about it because when I was diagnosed, the first thing I did is ran home and looked in my Merck manual because, I do OB/GYN, maternal fetal medicine. I don't care patients who are old and Parkinson's disease. And so, I didn't know what I was dealing with. And all I can remember is reading that the life expectancy was 10 years. It's mostly older people who were diagnosed with it. But I said, man, 10 years. So I remember calling my parents, crying with them on the phone, talking to my wife about it, just being totally devastated. And from that point forward, I ignored it for about 10 years.
Wow.
Well, I would see a doctor, but I would follow the medication regimen, but I wasn't actively involved, and I really didn't do much besides just take my medication. Mm-hmm. I really tried to hide it from the world. I mean, I told the hospitals and medical boards and stuff like that I had Parkinson's, but I never really did anything, out in public with it.
Mm-hmm.
People around me long enough they could see that I had a little bit of a tremor. A lot of people thought I had MS.
Okay. And did it affect your work at all in those early years?
No, it really didn't, because the medications work really well in the beginning.
Okay.
And as time got on, I guess I did my last delivery maybe about 10 years ago.
Okay.
So I delivered babies for about 10 years, and then I stopped doing deliveries and just did consultative stuff. But I continued on to do fetal transfusions up until right before I retired.
Wow, that's great. And so you went through this 10-year period where you felt like you kind of ignored it. You took the medications and were able to keep the symptoms under control. But can you talk about then what changed? What, after 10 years, what was it that changed for you that made you think about things a different way?
Well, the problem with Parkinson's is like getting neurological disease is very isolating. Mm-hmm. And so I was isolating myself more and more so I wouldn't have to deal with the awkwardness of having tremor and difficulties with speech and understanding and stuff like that. So finally got to a point where my wife, my parents sat me down and said, this is enough.
You did an intervention.
You did an intervention, yeah.
Yeah.
So this was right when we were getting ready to leave North Carolina and come down to Florida. And I said, okay, I need to do something about it. So I started becoming more actively involved about it. Okay.
And what did that look like when you say more actively involved? How did things change?
Well, first, it was just kind of, being able to talk about Parkinson's and, coming to grips with it and, being more open about it and just kind of I think some of the stuff that you carry inside when you've got a sitting diagnosis like that. And then eventually it became, what can I do about it? And it seemed to be more and more that exercise was something that was positive on Parkinson's. It didn't seem to matter whether you rode a bike and I always exercised. I ran track in college, and I've done an Ironman maybe a long time ago. But I've always done a lot of exercising. I hadn't done anything since my diagnosis, and finally, I said, well, I'll try something. And so my wife got me hooked up with a personal trainer.
Okay.
Personal trainer for about 3 months before I moved down to Florida. I moved down here before my wife and kids got here, and when I got down here, I just kind of fell across the gym. It was just the one that was down the street. I walked into it not knowing anything about CrossFit.
Wow. That's rare. I think, what was it? Maybe it's better that you didn't know anything about it, so you weren't scared away. It was better than this. But what did you think when you walked in the door?
I was very intimidated. First of all, I was in my late 40s, early 50s, and and these kids were in there throwing big weights around. I was in there, I could do a pull up. I think I did one on the first day. And, I had a dad bod going on and stuff like that. And so, it was very intimidating. The coaches, I've been very fortunate the whole time in my CrossFit journey. I've had very supportive coaches, and that's really made a big difference. And the CrossFit community is so embracing and accepting, and really, for me, it was great. And then the competitive nature of CrossFit. I'm a very competitive person, and a lot of people who do CrossFit are also very competitive people. And,
yes.
And so for me, that competitiveness, even though a lot of times you just compete against yourself, was very addicting to me.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And then I responded very positive to it. Positive for me.
Can we back up just for a second? I guess we should have done this earlier, but for people listening who are not familiar, can you just explain what Parkinson's disease is and then why we think exercise can have a positive impact?
And I'll explain, not as a neurologist, because I'm not, but I'll explain it as a patient, okay?
That's who's listening, yeah.
Right. So Parkinson's is a problem with your substantia nigra, which is in the deep part of your brain, and it produces a chemical called dopamine. And once you lose about 80% of your substantia nigra, your dopamine levels fall low enough that you start to have symptoms. And so although I was 36 when I had my diagnosis, I had already lost about 80% of my substantia nigra by that point. And so Parkinson's, generally patients often present with a tremor, but sometimes they can just present with stiffness. It's much more than just a tremor in old folks. It's stiffness. It's difficulty with gait, gait disturbances. There's often a lot of anxiety and depression that goes with Parkinson's because of the lack of dopamine. And then so these often have falls, and so that. I've been very fortunate that I haven't had any of the mental, because I don't think I've had any of the mental compensations that often occur with Parkinson's. But sometimes there's hallucination and dementia as well.
Wow. And then, we think, that, like you said, there's been so much research on exercise, and particularly I've seen a lot on cycling and Parkinson's, and we think mainly because that's increasing the dopamine. And so when the dopamine is higher, then that minimizes some of the symptoms that you may experience, correct?
That's right. That's right. And I feel better. I start moving better once I get into a workout, and then after the workout, that will continue for about 4 hours, and then it'll continue for about a day afterwards. So most benefits about 4 hours after I work out, and then usually for the rest of the day. So if I don't work out the day before, the following day I don't feel as well. I have a lot more slowness in my movement.
Wow, that's
also,
okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Insomnia, constipation, and that's just the motor complications of Parkinson's. The whole non-motor stuff is also in there. It's a pretty bad disease.
Yeah, well, that has to be kind of really cool, though, to be able to do the exercise and then see an immediate impact in terms of your symptoms, and see that correlation. Because oftentimes I think, maybe people do exercise because they know it's good for them in the long term, but to be able to see a real impact on your symptoms in the moment must be pretty gratifying.
It is. And I tell all these kids, I say kids, but all these folks at CrossFit, you guys get to do CrossFit because you want to. I do CrossFit because I have to.
Yeah.
It's a matter of life or death.
Yeah.
So my quality of life won't be the same if I stop exercising. And so, and it doesn't really matter. You're right. Whether you cycle, whether you do CrossFit, whether you do ballroom dancing, as long as it's exertional exercise, where you're getting your heart rate up and really, it's intensity. The intensity of your workout's enough that it gets you going. Then it seems to have a benefit. But going out for long rides, I tried going out for long cycles. I'll go out and ride my bike 100 miles, come back, and I won't be able to walk across the garage. Now, biking is often, most of the studies you're right are with biking. It's mostly because biking is a very safe thing to do. You can put up somebody on a stationary bike and stand next to them, and Parkinson's patients won't fall off the bike if it's stationary. With CrossFit, we get throwing big weights around sometimes. It's a little more challenging in terms of safety.
That's true. Can you talk about some of the benefits you've noticed maybe from doing different functional movements, or the type of exercise that you have in CrossFit, how that's impacted maybe, your balance or other symptoms that you might have?
I'm not sure that there's one particular movement or movements that are better than others for certain symptoms that I have. I just know it's a conglomeration. I usually my day is I do CrossFit, I do yoga, and I do boxing. So those are 3 hours out of my day that I do, and so I'm not sure which benefits what. But, I know for me, like, I can do strict movements very well. Strict pull-ups, I can do squats very well, cyclic squats. But try to get me to do a snatch squat, a clean snatch or a squat clean, and I just can't do that.
Well, it makes sense, I guess, with the increased just neurological demand and coordination with
Yeah.
some of those movements like the snatch. Yeah.
I can snatch, just not very well.
Well, probably like most of us, that's probably one of the hardest movements in CrossFit to do. But I did hear that you got your muscle up once you had been doing CrossFit for a little while, which is incredible.
Yeah, I was able to do a muscle up, and I just finished this year we had the neuroadaptive division for the Open. I did real well in that. I was very pleased. So
That's
for me, that
awesome.
was a great experience. Yeah.
That's so great. I'm so glad they had that division this year. That must have been really cool to be able to compete. And I think just in general, the way that the Open this year, you were able to really hone in and compete against sort of people that were in a similar like ability level or domain to you. And you can split it up, whether it's competing against doctors who do CrossFit, competing in the neuroadaptive division, competing in people in your local community. You can slice it however you want.
Right. But I kind of think it's akin to, wrestlers in high school. They have different weight classes.
Yeah, that's true.
The last 5 years when I did the Open, I was in the 8th or 9th percentile for my age group, and then this time I was in the top 10 for North America, which was very pleasing. Yeah,
that's amazing. That's amazing. So can you talk about? You said you started to notice benefits after you were doing CrossFit. What were some of the things other than you mentioned the immediate improvement in your symptoms for a few hours afterwards? But what were some of the other benefits that you noticed from doing CrossFit, being in the CrossFit affiliate?
The biggest benefit is that of the sense of community. Because for me, that was a problem. That's why the pandemic has been so difficult. Because I took a year off of CrossFit and just worked out in my garage here, and that wasn't the same. Really, it's that accepting in the community and the support of the community that's really made a difference for me. You feel engaged. You're really participating in other people's workouts, and it's much more of a community than just kind of an isolating exercise.
Absolutely. I think, I've felt that too, just finally being able to go back into the gym, realizing how big of an impact that community makes, just being around other people and working out around other people, and how much I missed that over the past year.
And,
go ahead.
Yeah. So now once I got my shots, and I went right back to a new box because our old box had closed, and have been very fortunate with the situation.
That's great. But it looks like you've got a great garage gym there. I can see on the video.
We do, yeah.
When
our box closed, I bought half the equipment. So
that's lucky.
Yeah. And I have 2 kids who do CrossFit. My parents, actually in the mid-'80s, come over and do it. My kids belong to the affiliate. My parents don't, but they'll come over here. And my dad will do push presses with 30-pound dumbbells and stuff like that. In his mid-'80s, so I'm real proud of my mom. She asked for a weight belt for Mother's Day.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So you're creating your own little community with family at home too.
That's right.
That's so amazing. And then also you've been involved, it's not just that CrossFit has benefited you personally in your symptoms and the progression of your Parkinson's disease, but you also it's been a great way for you to be able to give back and to bring awareness and use the power of the community to help other people. And so you've been involved in a annual, what you call a FoxWAD, which raises money for Parkinson's research. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, part of this whole process for me, CrossFit has been so accepting, and I want to help and kind of get the word out about exercise. And so we thought we talked to Michael J. Fox Foundation. They said, well, why don't you do a benefit? So we started just locally to try to get the word out about exercise. So I had the local state representative come over, and the neurologist come and talk. And we got together. We had 110 people from Panama City and Panama City Beach come. So there's 6 boxes in our community. 5 of those boxes closed, the other one hosted. And those boxes lost money, even though I wasn't a member there, and sent their members to our box. We had 110 people participate that first year. Second year, we had 14 host gyms across the globe. 3 of those were in England. We had over 700 people compete.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so it was a great opportunity to kind of get the word out.
Absolutely.
I've talked to people from everywhere from South Africa to England over the phone about, my story in terms of CrossFit.
That's
So
so amazing.
more people hopefully get the word out. And
Absolutely. And then
again,
go ahead.
we're planning on this upcoming September 18th to move forward with the next version of the Foxwad 3. So we're excited about that. Not sure exactly what the workout's going to be, but if you're interested, it will be the web address, which is not up yet, will be www.push4parkinsons.com.
Pushforparkinsons.com. Cool. We'll link to that. And then when it's live, people will be able to find it. But super exciting. And I know a tough year with, with the pandemic, not being able to host the in-person events, but hopefully this will be your biggest year ever. And there'll be more people who get involved and do the workout.
Florida's wide slam open, so it is what it is.
That's amazing. And I know you've also really been a big advocate for really to push to recognize CrossFit as an exercise modality that can be helpful for people dealing with Parkinson's. Can you just talk about that, or anyone else that you know that has been able to use CrossFit to help with their symptoms?
So unfortunately, the evidence for CrossFit is really kind of anecdotal. My story, a couple other stories of people I know who have Parkinson's who've reached out to me over the last couple of years who do CrossFit. But most of the literature in terms of the Parkinson's and exercise, whether it be cycling or boxing, have very small numbers in terms of the studies. So I've gotten together with one of the researchers at University of Arkansas, a physical therapist, who's very interested in doing a randomized controlled trial of CrossFit. So taking patients who are newly diagnosed with Parkinson's and randomizing them. So like flipping a coin, putting them in one place or in one group or the other. Have one group start CrossFit, the other just be treated as they would normally be treated, and compare the outcomes of those two groups. Because in my mind, I'm convinced that Parkinson's can be treated with CrossFit in a safe fashion. But now we just need some evidence to prove that it's beneficial. So he's applied for some funding for that. So hopefully we'll get some funding and be able to move forward.
That's exciting. That would be a great study. And I just have to think, just sort of theoretically, that CrossFit should have such an incredible impact because of the way that it incorporates so many functional movements. And when we talk about, even in the level 1, we talk about all the 10 general physical skills and the more organic skills, and then the neurological skills. And so there's a lot of neurological adaptation that happens by doing these functional movements and things like jumping and Olympic weightlifting and balance and all those things that you would think would have a great impact on the symptoms of Parkinson's, and then also translate into daily activities too.
Yeah, as well as just the constant varied nature of it. Constantly creating those new pathways, I think is important too.
Absolutely.
That's why I think for me, CrossFit's been perfect in terms of the exercise that I can do to stay active and to be engaged in the community.
How do you think your life is different right now, having found CrossFit and doing this and doing sort of your routine of CrossFit and yoga and boxing every day, versus if you hadn't started exercising?
Well, I would have had to retire a lot earlier.
Okay.
Maybe my walking around the house is very difficult sometimes. I have a little mobility scooter and stuff like that. But if I hadn't found exercise, I'd be in trouble. I really would. I don't think I'd be very functional at all. So without CrossFit and boxing and exercise in general, I'd be in trouble. And not only from a physical standpoint, but just from a mental health standpoint as well. Not having an engaged community.
Absolutely. And has it impacted at all your medical treatment?
Well, I don't think my neurologist really understands exactly what CrossFit is.
Okay. You need to find a CrossFitting neurologist.
But he's very supportive of exercise in general, and so most people, he's a relatively young guy, and so most people know what CrossFit is, but they don't really understand exactly what it is. It's but until you experience it, it's hard to explain.
Absolutely, yeah. The best way is to show someone, I think. That's great. Well, I do want to ask, just while we have you here, I know that just the topic of exercise in pregnancy is such a big one, and I've had others, share their experience here on the podcast. But Wondering if you could just talk to that topic. If you have patients who are doing CrossFit before pregnancy and want to continue during, or want to get back into it postpartum, what are your general advice or recommendations? I know this is not medical advice here on the podcast, but just sort of general principles that you know from practice and from the research that's out there.
Sure. Couple things. One is, giving birth is one of the most physically demanding things that women have to do during their lifetimes. And that process of pushing and just the whole physical demand of the labor process, I think it's very important to be in shape for that. And so I definitely recommend continuing the exercises with some variations. Don't get your temperature up too high in a sustained fashion. Don't get your heart rate up too high in a sustained fashion. Don't put yourself at risk for falls. And if you meet those criteria, then most people, I generally would say, you should be able to continue doing what you're doing in a modified fashion.
That's great. That's great.
We did some research in East Carolina, maybe last 10 years ago. We randomized patients to doing circuit training exercise, and the group did not, and looked at the fetal variability during labor and fetal effects of circuit training. We found the increased variability, which is the heart rate pattern has increased in the sympathetic and parasympathetic tones, which is very reassuring sign of fetal well-being, was increased in patients who were randomized to circuit training. So that was very reassuring in terms of the fetal effects.
That's great. So, maternal effects in terms of increasing strength and fitness to be able to go through labor, and then fetal effects also seeming like the babies do better during labor when their moms have been exercising.
Yeah. And postpartum, most people say take off 6 weeks. But I generally say, you can come back after 2 if you delivered vaginally, just go slow, because that's, again, being part of an engaged community and postpartum depression stuff. And it's important to get back into your usual routine if you can do that.
And being mindful about how you progress back up to it. Not, like all of us competitive CrossFitters, making sure that we pace ourselves.
Everything in good, a little bit in good measure, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Great. Well, there's 3 questions that I usually ask everyone towards the end of the podcast. So the first one I like to ask is, what are the 3 things that you do now on a regular basis that have the biggest positive impact on your health?
One is staying engaged. Being that good father, the good spouse, the good husband, the good friend. I'm the one who reaches out to people. And so maintain that involvement in my community is really a good part in terms of my health.
I didn't ask before, but I know you had your kids all after you were diagnosed. What has it been like for your kids, sort of seeing you go through this and facing this diagnosis?
I'm being emotional because it's the hardest thing to talk about. I'm so proud of them. They've really dealt with it very well. My oldest is a CrossFitter, was very active in the Foxwide. My middle son is a gymnast. He went to nationals 2 years in gymnastics, level 10, and now he's doing CrossFit. So he's a beast.
I'm sure he's just crushing it. Yeah.
Getting ready. 3 of us getting ready to go to the games together. We're going to camp out at the games.
Oh, fun!
Up in a couple of weeks. So we're really looking forward to that as well. So we'll be up there. I'm not sure how the camping is going to go, but it'll go really well, really poorly.
It'll be an adventure for sure.
So the kids have been very supportive. It's all they've known is me with Parkinson's, and for them, it's a natural thing. But they've been very supportive, and sometimes I know it's harder when I say, "Can you guys take the trash out? I just can't do that today. I'm not walking well today. Can you take the trash out?" And they always say yes. Sometimes it's most of the time it's not a big deal. And my wife's been very supportive during this process too. My whole family has been very lucky, very, very lucky.
That's amazing. It's so important to have that support, and also I'm sure it gives you a lot of sort of motivation and purpose as well.
Yes. Yep.
All right. Sorry, I interrupted you. 2 more things that you do on a regular basis that have a big exercise
we've talked about. My daily routine of boxing and yoga. And yoga, I've really been surprised at how beneficial that is. I do that 4 days a week, and it's really been helpful for me in terms of just avoiding injury. I'm 56 years old, and I'm not quite put together the way I used to be. And so, your risk for injury, but the yoga has really been helpful the last few months in terms of preventing that from happening. So exercise. I guess the last thing is cutting myself some slack. So,
yes,
telling myself, it's okay if I don't get that last deadlift or if I don't get that last rep in before the clock runs out. And just being, nobody's going to die. It's going to be okay.
Put things in perspective. Yeah.
Perspective. If I freeze or I can't walk across the floor, even if it's it's inopportune time or it's, embarrassing, all of a sudden people trying to have a private conversation. I'm there and I can't move away. That's can be awkward sometimes. Just kind of giving myself some forgiveness for that, and moving on. I think is part of my health.
Yeah, good advice for all of us. I think just give yourself some grace and, yeah. All right. What's one thing that you think would have an impact on your health, but you have a hard time implementing it, or something that you're working on?
Sleep hygiene, man.
Yeah,
part of Parkinson's is the insomnia is really resistance to therapy, and man, I can be up in the middle of the night all the time, and so sleep hygiene, in terms of being a regular routine, in terms of doing the same things ritualistic every time you go to sleep, having your room cool, not doing screen time 30 minutes before you go to bed, not talking about anything stressful 30 minutes before you go to bed. Those basic kind of concepts are sometimes hard to do, but they're so important, because if you're up at night, then people tend to, at least I tend to eat at night, and that's not good for you. And this leads to other problems. And so, I think if I was able to get better night's sleep, that would be very beneficial. And then also to incorporate strategic napping. And so when you're a resident, you do strategic napping. I remember we took a class on strategic napping as faculty. And,
that's amazing.
So maybe to incorporate some of that strategic napping more in my life. Sleep it's so important in terms of just your recovery, your feeling of well-being. If you don't get good sleep, it's tough to recover sometimes.
So true. I love that term too, strategic napping. That's great.
That's a great term.
I'm gonna have to try that. All right. Last question: what does a healthy life look like to you?
I guess for me, a healthy life is having the physical, emotional, and mental abilities or well-being to be able to positively contribute to those in your life who are important to you.
I love that. Well, before we wrap up here, I did want to just ask if you had any other final thoughts, anything that you wanted to share, or any advice to others who are facing maybe a new diagnosis, whether it's Parkinson's disease or something else, about just sort of the approach and advice that you would give to them.
Yeah, don't do what I did in terms of isolate and ignore. It doesn't work, and eventually it catches up to you. And your life will be much more enriching if you kind of tackle it on and head on, and just kind of go after it.
That's great.
That would be my advice. And and for people who are new to Parkinson's, or know somebody who's new to Parkinson's, get them off the couch and get them moving. It doesn't really matter whether you're cycling or walking, or do something to increase your heart rate and get moving. And then if you can do it in a sense of community, I think it's even more beneficial. But get people moving around. It's very, very helpful.
Absolutely. You heard it. Get people moving. I love it. That's a great note to end on. So thank you so much, Dr. Livingston. I really appreciate you taking the time and being so willing to share your story, and just how you said that initially maybe you didn't take the best approach and wish you would have done things a little bit differently, but you moved past it and now are being such an advocate for so many other people, and just sharing your story, and then all the things that you're doing to try to get the word out there and help people improve their quality of life with Parkinson's. So make sure, for people listening, that you check out the site again. Can you repeat that again? It's Parkinson's.
Parkinsons.com.
Parkinson's, if you want to participate this year in September. And is there anywhere else that people can reach out to if they wanted to get in contact?
I'm on Facebook as under Jeff Livingston. That's probably the best way to get up with me.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you or someone you know has a story to share on a future episode of Pursuing Health, please write me at info@pursuing-health.com. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, please also consider subscribing and giving it a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does help to get the word out to more people.